But yeah, this is called Monument. It's from the book Count Four. It came out, I think, in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So a lot of people didn't hear about this book, but it's excellent. So I also want to plug it. Count Four by Keith Kopka. The poem is Monument. Okay. Since I've spent this hour perfecting a controlled arc of spray paint to enclose the giant red A scrawled across the clapboard siding of someone's vacation home, I decide it's a good idea to run when the police appear in response to the Ratton patio bonfire I've started with a blowtorch of hairspray and lighters stolen from my mother's purse. A woman who worked the late shift, who wasn't really sure where her kid was most of the time. And even when I fold my body, creep vine flat along the banks of the Bristol River, I am caught, zip-tied and foot-stuffed into the cubby-holed back seat of an idling Crown Vic, my wrist shredding more with each strange shout through the window at the chubby rookie left behind to watch me. Even then I knew he was the boy picked last, yet secretly too sure of himself in a body growing faster than the small world it governs. He was like the dinosaur sponges I bought at the market to ripen in kitchen bowls, until they capped their potential by sucking every container dry. I swear I can see that water on his cheeks as he pulls me from the car by my neck, getting bigger and taller and thicker in front of me, my compliant frame absorbing each swing of his nightstick until finally I too start to take shape. So this is a poem that is very different from, say, the Wild Roof Journal aesthetic, right? And that's part of why I picked it. One thing I really like about this poet in general is that for people who don't know, and it would be in his bio, I think, on the website where it's linked, he formerly toured in punk and hardcore bands, right? And obviously had a little bit of misspent youth. And I grew up the first 10 years of my life in a neighborhood that's also got a lot of misspent youth, right? Like, I also had a mother who worked two jobs and wasn't always aware where her kid was. I've certainly sat in the back of a Crown Vic with handcuffs on because I was caught vandalizing a house when I was 15. So this is an experience that speaks to me both as a personal anecdote, but also because you don't see a lot of poetry like this, right? Contemporary poetry that I'm reading a lot has really eloquent ways of describing nature, the intersection of humans and nature. We find new ways to describe a sunset. We talk about grief and loss and sorrow and trauma, birth and life, but there's very little that I see personally about mischief. And it's more than that. This isn't just a poem about mischief. It's also a poem that talks about masculinity in a way that I really like. I ponder gender roles a lot because I find myself to be someone who doesn't inhabit a traditional gender role, and I reject femininity in a lot of ways. But I do know that when I was handcuffed and sitting in the back of a Crown Vic, that I cried and bawled like a little girl and suddenly decided to inhabit that gender role very well because I thought it might help me. And in this way, right, I mean, we both have the masculinity of the speaker here who was committing the crime and was arrested, right? And then we have the chubby rookie who, I don't know about you, but oftentimes in reading, I associate chubby with young. And so you've got this young rookie who pulls him out of the car by his neck and gets bigger and taller and thicker as he beats him. And then as he's being beaten, this poet is starting to take shape. And I really think that's the most unique portrayal I've seen of like toxic masculinity, right? In a poem. And I really love it. So thank you for letting me bring it today.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Say,
go ahead.
Aaron, yeah, you go first. You got something.
No, go ahead.
The first thing I wrote down when I read this was A for anarchy, question mark, and then something about punk. And it had that feel for me. And my initial response with a poem like this in terms of the storyline, if I just look at this as a little scene in the movie, would be if I was the director making this in a little like a music video, the cop, the chubby cop, would be the embodiment of the toxic masculinity because he's insecure and he's, you know, clearly a cop because he's dealing with shit that he didn't deal with in terms of needing to overcompensate. But I had a weird little sliver of sympathy for him, even though he's beating the guy. But I also had sympathy for the the narrator, because he's so perfectly, beautifully articulating this moment, which I also can relate to in terms of the smaller version of the arc. And in my case, I didn't get fully handcuffed. It was a cold night. And when they threw me up against the hood of the cop car, I remember thinking, well, at least the hood of the cop car is warm while they're patting me down. And yeah, that was like that. These little tiny moments just get kind of locked in. And so in terms of, well, let me pose this as a question. In terms of toxic masculinity, how would you characterize the toxic masculinity in this? Like, is it the narrator? Is it the cop? Where's the toxicity? Because I kind of relate to both of them.
Right. And it's almost like because he's the boy picked last, right? The chubby rookie is the boy picked last. And he looks at this boy, and, especially when we're younger, the kids who do the vandalism, the punk kids, they're cool in a way, right? Like, that's also part of the masculinity. Like, we need to run around, we need to run away from the cops. You need to take your beating because that's manly. But also, it's manly to give a beating, right? And he's overcompensating because he's a rookie, he's brand new, and yet he's secretly too sure of himself in a body growing faster than the small world it governs, right? His power is small, but he's overconfident, and so he beats him with his nightstick, which is, I mean, a huge overreaction for someone spray painting an A and starting a bonfire. That's naughty, but it sounds like this poet or this speaker is a kid, right? So, and this rookie is just barely away from being a kid himself. And one thing I really think about too, well, I'll finish with the toxic masculinity, right? Like the sense that if you're a man and you're manly, then you're supposed to fight. And there's a couple of poems in this collection that deal with masculinity in a big way. And another one, he gets in his first fight, and I think he is looking at himself in the mirror, and he mouths the word unstoppable. He's unstoppable, right? And so it's that sense that, like, you're supposed to fight. You're supposed to get into fights. You're supposed to be daring and brave. And, I think part of it is just like, I keep returning to getting bigger and taller and thicker in front of me, and then his compliant frame absorbing the swings of the nightstick, right? And also, I have to mention that the dinosaur sponges, like, I haven't thought about that since I was little. And I think we all had those, right? You like buy them, and they were like in line at the grocery store. They were right by the register. They're super lame. They're just like this big. You put them in a bowl and they absorb the water, and they're large. And that's the only thing they do. It's not that cool of a toy, but the thought, like, until they capped their potential by sucking every container dry. And I think about, like, how if you have this need to be masculine in the way that this rookie is, right, then you're capping your potential. And he says, I swear I can see the water on his cheeks. And that's unique and articulate. And I would never consider to look at something in that way.
There was literally a picture of the dinosaur sponges at the top, which I didn't register. I just thought, it's some abstract art that I don't understand.
Oh my
and then
God.
When I got to dinosaur sponges, I said, I don't know what that is. That must be some obscure metaphor that I don't know. So I went to Google, and I said, oh shit, I had those when I was a kid. So what he did was he plucked something out of my 4-year-old brain and just like dropped it in front of me. That's a baller move. And then, so you get a gut punch at the end when you basically see the two people coming into their own. They're both being formed into who they're going to be. One guy doing the beating, the other guy getting the beating.
Right. It's almost like this, it's like this toxic coming of age, right?
Right.
He's starting to take shape, and he's losing that dinosaur sponge mentality. And instead he's becoming a man, right? This is how you become a man. You get the crap kicked out of you by a cop, but another reason that I like this poem is that there's a sense of otherness to it, right? A sense of being an outsider. He's spray painting the A, which, I assumed was anarchy too, like punk symbol. And of course, that's like the biggest sense of otherness, right? Oftentimes that's why we're drawn to the punk movement or the hardcore movement, is because we feel like we're outsiders in a way, and we don't feel like we fit into society. And I mean, I was really taken by that, by the whole thing. And the poem itself, if our listeners pull it up and read it, I really like the form here. It's a stickic. It's all one continuous stanza. And you sort of tumble through it because they're short lines. So it's like, since I've spent line break this hour perfecting line break, a controlled arc. And so you sort of tumble through it and it builds momentum until the final moment. And I think that's also something that this poem does well. It really does a great job of building momentum and then releasing that momentum and leaving you with a final thought that he's finally taking shape.
I will attempt an idea here, but I don't, because I love how the it is like it's a narrative poem. I love that. And always when I read a good one like this, it's like more poems like this, because it's so, in one way, easy to grasp, but it is, such depth to it, and kind of there's such a perception there. But is there something going on with like resistance and creativity? Because I had the feeling that there's like some kind of awareness of connection here. Because there's like the surface layer of the resistance and sides, and even just the active vandalism is on, it's a targeted act on, we'll just call it a vacation, someone's vacation home. So there's this idea of like us against them. But what I really liked about it is like this perception comes through, this awareness of the connection between these things that seem like opposites. So that's why the taking shape thing is super interesting, because that to me, that shows the awareness of like, well, this is kind of like my generative development or process, as a person, as a creative person, maybe, if that's taking it too far. So I like that awareness of connection, and it's not just, cops, bad guys beat me, and I'm justified, and they're the bad guy. So that was just kind of something I was thinking of as I was reading it for the first time and going over it.
Well, and the other thing that I like about this poem is going back to what we were discussing in the beginning, right? Like, how do you approach people with poetry and make it engaging and get them to engage with it if they don't have a history of reading poetry and they've never been introduced to it? This poem has a clear narrative, and it's easy to read and it's easy to understand, right? I mean, any one of us, there's a lot to interpret here, right? Not everybody is going to read this poem and break it down into little bits and talk about the form, but you can follow this story. You can follow that this rookie was overcompensating, and that this young punk was getting the crap kicked out of him, and like the references to childhood, especially for millennials, to the like the dinosaur shaped sponge, right? These are all things that make this poem easily accessible, and I think it also uses really accessible language, but it isn't defined by simplicity either. That that is to say that I think direct and simple language is something that can be masterful if it's used well, because it makes it so accessible. And that's what I think is really good here. And again, it's just, personally, I relate to this poem. I want to see more poetry like this out in the world, because I want to see poetry of all different perspectives. And I don't see a lot in the sense of like, the vein that I grew up. So personally, it speaks to me a great deal. I always felt like, I was overcompensating when I was young. I was vandalizing. I was running around because I just wanted to express this like unnamed rage that I had, right? I'm different and I want to show it somehow, but also I'm inhibited by all of these roles that I'm supposed to inhabit. And even when I get caught committing crimes, there's a certain role that I play. But yeah, that's now I'm getting a little abstract here, but yes, it's I think this poem is great in its accessibility too.